Hey, Sassy Stuff. I'm Emma here with Bailey, and we have finally made it. We are talking about the national championship game, our early look at this game. This is a clash between two of the biggest brands in all of college football, Ohio State and Notre Dame. Each of them overcame midseason losses to reach this title game. Ohio State even had that loss to Michigan in their rivalry game, last game of the regular season. But both of these teams have been so resilient, so dominant in these playoffs. So I'm excited to see how they fare.
If you would have told me that Ohio State and Notre Dame would be our final two teams, I would have said, you're insane.
Yeah.
There's just no way. However, clearly we're being proven wrong. So this is going to be a very fun game to watch. But also, I'm not going to lie, my heart does break a little bit to not see an SEC team being represented. And watching that Texas game to Ohio State just about wrenched my soul. It was horrible.
Well, I mean, Texas played so well for so long in that game, and then it just got away from them in the last few minutes. So they were so close. But I think Ohio State is a fantastic team this year. And if you look at the four-team playoff, they wouldn't have even been in there. So it's cool to see that this team, who's had two regular season losses, be so dominant in these playoffs and actually reach the national championship game, which shows what a good thing these 12 teams in the playoffs can be. And so if we do expand it or bring it back down to 8, I think it is only better for the sport to really figure out who can go on these playoff runs and win when it matters the most.
I don't disagree with you on that. I think when we all heard about the 12 playoff system, we had such a unique opinion of it's a love-hate relationship with it, where it's like there's so many teams. This almost feels like March Madness to a sense, but there's also so many teams that are getting an opportunity to show up and show out in the same way their excellence of their programs has demonstrated throughout their entire year. So as much as I'm like, oh, I hate it, but also like it really does show that there's a lot more talent in these different teams than what a typical AP poll states. So if anything, this has been a really interesting social experiment to watch over the last year. And hopefully the committee definitely takes notes from this and understands and recognizes that there's a lot of additional factors that need to start going into these rankings, as clearly demonstrated by these two teams that are playing for the national championship.
Absolutely. It needs to be reseeded just like they do in the NFL. You always, whoever gets those bye weeks then goes and plays the lowest seed from there. And I think moving forward, they should maybe adopt something similar. But we'll get into all of the changes that we might make in a later video. But for right now, I kind of want to talk about some of the key players and key matchups in this game that will help either team win. So, I mean, the first ones I'm obviously looking at are Riley Leonard versus Will Howard. So, how are you feeling about these two players?
It's really interesting to watch these two in particular. I mean, both of these teams, Ohio State and Notre Dame, have been really heavily defensive led. I mean, their defenses have been very consistent throughout this entire season. But these two quarterbacks have really set a precedence for what it means to be team leaders. The interesting part of as we're going to this game is that Will Howard is facing a hand injury after the Cotton Bowl against Texas. And despite this, I mean, he still threw for 289 yards. So the guy is doing great. But overall, his entire season, comparatively speaking to Riley Leonard, he has been very consistent, has thrown over 3,700 passing yards, has had 33 touchdowns, only 10 interceptions. I mean, from a statistical standpoint, this kid is like ready to rock, which is going to be interesting to see if his hand injury does affect him in this upcoming game.
Yeah, I agree. I think Will Howard is so solid for this Ohio State team. He did struggle a little bit at the beginning of the season, but he's really found his confidence, his strengths. He's great with pocket awareness, which is huge for a quarterback, great with progression reads and man coverage passing. He is vulnerable against complex zone defenses, which is kind of good news when playing Notre Dame because they do like to play man. But when they played Texas, they played a lot as Texas plays zone. So it worked in Texas's favor there. So maybe Notre Dame has to adopt that kind of style of play in order to get something done against Will Howard. I think he's sensational. And then we look at Riley Leonard, and he is obviously this great dual threat quarterback. He is gritty and tough and great in the red zone efficiency. So I know he's not the best passer at times, but he really did have to step up in the passing game to beat Penn State. So the ability is there. So I think both of these quarterbacks will need to show up on the day to help lead their team to victory. But like you said before, these are defense heavy teams. So it's kind of going to be cool to see which one can break through the other team's defense.
Definitely. And the fact that you do have, I mean, we have seen so many other teams that have struggled with their defense. The fact that really it's coming down to leadership and seeing who is going to step up on the offense side, it's going to make this a really entertaining game to watch, frankly. And especially from the fact is that people can choose how they show up on a day. And just like you're saying, Emma, I mean, depending on how Will and Riley decide to show up, regardless though, it's going to be a really great game to witness. Talk about this whole NIL thing real fast because if you really look at this, these two teams that we're playing up against, Ohio State had around a $20 million budget when it came to their particular team. Notre Dame has not disclosed their funds in particular. However, we do know that they have something called the Fund, which has been their NIL ability for different sports in their particular program. It was ranked number 15 overall preseason. And if you're looking at, I mean, this is not like it's some crazy astronomical spending program on the Notre Dame side from what we can gather so far versus Ohio State that has probably, if not the number one of the biggest NIL budgets out there. What does this show us about what NIL is doing to these different teams in college football?
I mean, Ohio State, just like teams like Texas, they can buy essentially these fantastic players from all over the country, which really rounds out these teams, gives them a little bit more depth when teams don't have depth nowadays. And that is huge. If you have one, like obviously Ohio State lost their center, having someone else step up, that is like the key player to me. I think if you lose your center, sometimes the whole offense goes down and goes awry and nothing good happens. So having the ability to bring in another center, your backup center, and not miss a beat almost is crazy nowadays. So they can afford to have a little bit more depth and have these great players all across the board. Notre Dame, I think, has a little bit more pull because of the degree that these students get as well. Also, Marcus Freeman, I think, has shaped such an incredible culture around this team. He is my preferred coach over Ryan Day and Marcus Freeman. I pick Marcus Freeman as the better coach right now. So I think playing for him and obviously having the Notre Dame degree draw helps them not have to spend as much money. It's kind of how like Alabama didn't have to spend as much money because they had Nick Saban. So it's kind of interesting to see how NIL does play a factor in who is getting to the end of the playoffs.
Definitely, definitely. It's just such a wild experience to watch this be the first year to see virtually, I feel like two teams are on the opposite spectrum that we're now paying witness to actually competing for the national championship. Yes, NIL definitely does matter from what we have seen, but it's going to be quite entertaining to watch as this continues to lay effect into this next season, especially as it kind of sets more roots. But let's go ahead and talk about though the path to the championship for these different teams. I mean, if we're looking back to this entire playoff season, Ohio State dominated when it came to all their different games. Notre Dame had a couple of close calls and a couple of really big wins, but who are you picking over one another to win the national championship?
It's so hard. I go back and forth, but I have one that comes forward for me because of just how dominant they have been, and that would be Ohio State. I think there's a lot of things that Notre Dame can do to win this game. I don't think that it's going to be a blowout by any means. I think this is going to be a very competitive game. Notre Dame's their offensive philosophy is a ground focus game, and they also rely on Leonard's running ability to really make the defenses shaky and throw them off their game. Ohio State, they have great defensive versatility with Caleb Downs and Ransom, which are critical in both run and pass defense. They also have their defensive tackles, Williams and Hamilton, who are pivotal in shutting down these playoff opponents' run games. And with Notre Dame being such a run heavy team, I think that is absolutely crucial for Ohio State to win this game. And they succeed at it every week we've seen. So it's fantastic. Notre Dame is really going to have a much more complex offensive scheme to win this game. We saw they had to rely a little bit more on the passing game against Penn State, and I think you're going to have to rely on it even more against Ohio State. So there are a couple key matchups here that I'm like favor Ohio State, but I still think Notre Dame has every opportunity to win this game. They just have to get that run game going. And I don't know if they can, but if they can, then I think they can pull it out.
I think your sentiments are shared by a lot of different people as well. I mean, there's an 8.5 point favor for Ohio State over Notre Dame in this upcoming game. And unfortunately, if we're going to kind of look at the injury report as well, I mean, all you really have as a concern from Ohio State is going to be Will Howard. You have several different players that are out from the Notre Dame side. And on top of that, the team actually did contract the flu. From an overall health standpoint, Ohio State's something looking like the more well rounded team going into this. But I don't disagree with you. I mean, when we're looking at the matchups that have happened between Ohio State and Notre Dame, they've met 9 times. The last 6 times, Ohio State has come out the victor. And I think that there might be that little edge there that's for Notre Dame, that they want to be able to break through that 6 streak loss to Ohio State and come out on top with this national championship. But again, from the odds that are kind of stacking right now, Ohio State definitely is going to be a tough team to beat. But I have the sneaky suspicion the Irish might be able to do it. But then again, I've been wrong before, so who knows?
No, I would love for Notre Dame to win. This is a team that I've fallen in love with this year, and I love Marcus Freeman's coaching style and how he's built a community around this team. So I think if they win the first 12-team playoff, that would be amazing. Also, I would love it to be a non-conference just because that adds to the chaos of college football, and we always love chaos in college football. This has been a very chaotic year. But I look at some of these matchups, and so Notre Dame with their defensive injuries, you're gonna have to shut down running back duo Judkins and Henderson to stop Ohio State. I think yes, they play man a lot, but I think we're gonna have to work on playing a little bit more zone because that's how Texas was able to shut down this Ohio State team for a while until they started making mistakes and slipping up. Obviously, Notre Dame secondary with Christian Gray and Leonard Moore, they are tasked with containing Ohio State's passing attack, which has always been their strength here. They tried to beat Michigan with a run game. No, beat him with your wide receivers. So I just think if you're looking at power, I think Ohio State has more. Both of these teams are incredibly physical. And Notre Dame, if they can get a couple turnovers or a couple calls go in their direction, if they can establish that run game, then I think they can 100% win. But if I'm just picking of what I feel is going to happen on the day, I would pick Ohio State to pull it out in the fourth.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. So, everyone, please be sure to tune in for the national championship coming up here so shortly. It'll be broadcasting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time Zone. We look forward to deciding and figuring out who exactly is going to come out on top in this madness of the last college football year. But I'm Bailey, and this is Emma, and this has been an episode of Sassy Stuff.